if there's one advice that for data engineers, get used to change, right? It's going to constantly change. Every day there's a new tool. Every day there's a new model. Every day there's a new LLM, right? So you're gonna have to get comfortable with change.
Welcome to It's About Data, episode 84. This is a continuation of our conversation with Dipti Borkar from episode 81. Dipti Borkar, well, welcome back again. This time we recorded before talking about Microsoft Fabric, and this time we want to get a bit more into Fabric IQ, into semantics, things like knowledge graphs. So last recording we did together, I asked you about the role of data engineers in the future if we don't have to do as much work on data integration. And you alluded to the fact that data engineers will need to get further into the meaning of data. So not just like the technicalities of making sure the pipelines actually run, but like the AI type meaning, the human meaning, the semantics, the ontologies. So I want to ask you a question. I asked a version of this question to your colleague Itzhak, and it's how do we train data engineers to do these more AI oriented tasks that they're not particularly good at traditionally? So like building ontologies, that's key for Fabric IQ. How do we get data engineers building ontologies?
Yeah, great question. I think to answer that, you kind of first have to understand how it all fits together, right? And it's kind of all layered in some ways. So Fabric is obviously the platform we talked about in the previous episode. Fabric IQ is a set of different capabilities that together bring a ton of context on top of your data for your AI, right? And when I say AI, it could mean a data agent, it could mean an operational agent, it could mean just a universal agent, right? That's leveraging all of this stack underneath it. And so Fabric IQ is sort of three layers. We start off with the data and the context. You've kind of have the structured, but the unstructured piece is actually very important. And we are seeing a lot of usage of unstructured with AI because now you can truly harness all of that unstructured data with embeddings and AI search and the actual vector indexes, etc. So that's where within Fabric IQ you have one lake, and which is the foundation. On top of that, the first kind of step that customers tend to take is what are the relationships between your tables or your entities, right? And so you actually build out a semantic model. And this is typically part of Power BI. But the model itself is kind of the core set of entities and the relationships. So it gives it more meaning on top of that raw data that you just have sort of in one lake that might be in an open format. And then on top of this, you can layer in ontologies. And so ontologies includes obviously the entities. That's where a true fully built out graph comes in. But also you have context like rules, right? It's almost like a representation of how you run your business in a digital version of it, right? And so it disambiguates what these entities mean and these properties mean and so on. And so all of these things together essentially form that core Fabric IQ stack that data engineers would want to use. Now, to go to your question about like how do we actually get them to the point of leveraging all of this, the good news is AI helps with that as well. So obviously, Fabric as a whole is a SaaS experience, and it's truly meant to be a low-code experience, right? So everything is visual. It's draggy, droppy. You can just pull and things around. Obviously, connect the different entities visually, and that kind of makes those changes underneath and the semantic models or within the ontology itself. But obviously, you can use Copilot, and so I think the learning. I mean, I've my past lives have been I spent a lot of time in startups. You've got to become uncomfortable, and you've got to constantly learn. Like that is the only if there's one advice that for data engineers, get used to change, right? It's going to constantly change. Every day there's a new tool. Every day there's a new model. Every day there's a new LLM, right? So you're gonna have to get comfortable with change and learn. And the learning process is going to be use AI to start the POCs, We have the concept of
Mhm.
fabric skills that are deeply integrated into Copilot or GitHub Copilot CLI that you can then simply leverage to actually just use natural language, and the rest is taken care of. So the good news is, in past lives that Tony used to talk about, or like databases, database
Mm.
engineers, we used to have SQL optimizers who would actually
Right.
optimize queries, right? Guess what? I mean, like there's pretty good queries being written from just NL to SQL conversion from Copilot, and so now the focus is actually driving the business value, right?
Mhm.
How do you use all of these tools, the stack, this Fabric IQ stack, to actually create a much more digital representation of the real world, convert your tribal knowledge into actual artifacts in Fabric that represent how decisions are being made, and then operationalize it end to end, building those data agents and building these operational agents. So use AI, right? But actually try it out, because it's a SaaS experience and it's super easy. If you have a semantic model, you can literally just create an ontology on top of it.
Mhm.
If you have a lake house, you can very easily create a semantic model in a very visual way. So every step can be visually done. Of
Mhm.
course, you have Copilot along with you.
Right, right. And what's really interesting here is I see two threads coming out of this, which is one, obviously, um, you know, you need to start, as I said, data engineers really need to start thinking about the meaning of data, and that's where semantics and intelligence come in. And of course, AI can, and part of it's to prepare this for AI, but of course, AI can basically provide some guidelines in terms of, sort of guiding you along there. So it's kind of
Absolutely.
very interesting sort of cross cutting. Um, I guess what leads me to is really two paths, as I use four fingers, which is on one hand, how we base, do we have to think about data differently when we prepare it for basically when it's being interacting, through agents, or agents are hitting it, and related to that, because that's really bound up in all this, is how we govern this, and basically, and what does Fabric, and does Fabric have any sort of baseline, basically capabilities there that help guide you into, as you're creating, creating this data, as you're creating essentially what we in the old school call metadata, which would be semantics, and then because I mean semantics ontology is actually, if you really, it's a form of metadata. Um, and the intelligence which put the organizational context. How do we basically then not just infer, but basically make explicit, the governance of all this and how we
Mhm,
should use
mhm.
this data?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, governance is a really, really key question, right? And even before we started to get into these AI use cases, which has exploded the need for absolute governance, we had our own problem with Fabric, because we had
Yes.
5 or 6 different engines, each with their own RBAC and fine-grained
Mm-hmm.
access control, all having to actually truly work on a single copy of data in one lake. But can they have their own governance? That didn't work, right?
No.
And so we actually just announced One Lake um, security GA. It's generally available at FabCon. And what this brings is it takes all of those engine level governance concerns and makes it a lake level concern, so that
Mm-hmm.
every engine adheres to this governance, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if Tony has access to data that Dipti doesn't have access to, well, Dipti's not going to get it, whether she tries with Spark, whether she tries with the data warehouse, whether she tries with Power BI. I'm stuck. I'm not going to get access to it, right? So
Dipti, I hate to say something there, but in reality, the situation is likely to be reversed.
it's such a strong partnership, Tony, that I have to
Yeah.
make sure that I reflect that in my examples.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's kind of going to be very important, and not a lot of products are really think. I mean, we had the problem because we had so many engines as Microsoft, right?
Right.
Others have a single engine and they don't actually have this problem to begin with. Now enter AI, and we're like, wow, we have one leg security, because when a data agent gets built on top of a data warehouse, or uses the lake house with Spark, or connects to a mirror Databricks data, guess what? It always has to adhere to One Lake security. and you're going to get the same results, and it's going to sort of govern you. You get governed data back in your models, and so governance sort of is we still have a ways to go, because what I would love to do is actually make it more open across the market. Right today, if you say, okay, is RBAC going to be a new excuse for locked data lock-in? We cannot get to that point, right? So we are working very closely with our partners, actually, on the Iceberg format, and trying to see if we can actually have a security interop story, which goes beyond data interop, which is going to be really, really important for customers, especially with AI, right, as we talked about. So now that you have AI, your models, your agents still can adhere to it within this Fabric ecosystem. And once we have a mapping of policies across, let's say, Snowflake and OneLake, and OneLake Security, you can use any platform as well. Now, your other question was more about like what about the metadata, right? So the governance, great. We now have a story. We have OneLake Security, but metadata can be in many different places as well. And how should users think about this? And that's where our catalog comes in. So OneLake catalog is a extremely widely used catalog. It's used by millions of developers, all the way down in Excel. And the beauty of it is it's deeply integrated with Office, right? So all your sensitivity labels, right? If you mark something confidential, guess what? That lakehouse is going to be confidential, and it's going to keep those labels, which you get the benefit, obviously, of the Microsoft ecosystem, right? And so the OneLake catalog includes the metadata, includes the labels, includes all of this that that customers have access to, that obviously the agents have access to, and so on. So obviously we have all of this with MCP endpoints, right? That's kind of the basics now. You've got to have an MCP endpoint so that agents can sort of connect to it. So yeah, it's a different stack. It's increasingly going to be very, very agentic. APIs will be, the way, the UIs over time will, SaaS is dead is increasingly being used. And so agents are going to be the way of accessing data, which means that the governance and the metadata become truly very, very important in that context.
Oh man, you just stirred up the hornet's nest considering your boss's comments there. But we'll leave that for another discussion.
Yeah. The SaaS is dead thing is like, it's almost a meme.
The SaaS apocalypse.
Right. I think everyone's embracing it, but then now they all claim that they're post SaaS now. Right. That's again the message that Tony was getting at a recent major conference. Like, SaaS is dead, but we're post SaaS. No, we do something that's not SaaS anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, in all honesty, it takes time. Like, these are behavioral changes, right? These are human changes. It doesn't happen overnight. Yes, it's happening at the pace that we haven't seen before, because just the use of agents across the board. But yeah, we do need low code experiences for a period of time. Over time, yes, agentic, all access may likely be agentic or CLI based, right? So
yeah. But I mean, security is one of those things that has to be software, right? That
Absolutely.
cannot be probabilistic. It has to be deterministic. And I always tell engineers who work for me or engineers I train, don't think of security as an impediment. Think of security as something that lets people access data, not that blocks them, but that actually allows them to access. Because if you don't have security, then no one can play in the sandbox. No one can play these games with data if we're not very, very careful about how sensitive data gets handled. Let me ask one follow-up question, and then we'll close out basically. And that is, how is Microsoft working with open source communities to enhance this interop? So like the Iceberg community, Polaris, and then even with other vendors like Snowflake, how is that happening?
Yeah, I mean, we are, like, as I said, I think we talked about in the previous episode, SQL was a very closed ecosystem, right? And we've completely opened that up, and there isn't a piece of data that's closed in some ways in Fabric, right? Everything is either Delta Lake or Iceberg. So we work very closely with both the communities. My team in particular, we have PMC members, committers, right, who work very actively at Iceberg Summit, which was just a few months back, and not just evangelize, but actually try to push it forward. And there are a few different areas. For example, when Iceberg, these formats came about, they were really just a table representation in
Mhm.
Parquet, right? And it was still very hard to represent all of the historical capabilities that SQL databases had,
Yeah.
right? For example, indexing. Does it
Mhm.
support indexing? What kind of indexes can it support? And so the extensibility, the pluggability, the ability to actually say you can create a vector index on an Iceberg table, and where does it actually get linked, etc. These are the kind of things that we work with the community on, making it more extensible, pluggable. Security is another area that I talked about earlier, where it's really, really important to have an open sort of. I wouldn't say it might be difficult to have a format because every engine kind of understands things on its own. I think the question is, how do these communities come together, continue to work in spite of the co-petition? Everyone
Yeah.
wants to, push their sort of own engines, but at the same time, that interop in the AI age is truly very important. Yeah.
No question about that. Well, Dipti, I very much enjoy, as always, I always enjoy our all too rare chances to cross paths and get into some pretty deep discussions. And hopefully have a few more. As I said, by the time that this episode airs, build will have been in the past. But I will just say, I hope we do have a chance to cross paths there and have some more conversation.
Sounds good. Looking forward to meeting in person again, Tony.
Okay.
And thank you so much, Matt. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thanks.
Great to
Cheers.
meet you.
Talk to you later.
Take care.
Thanks.